What's up, Covalence friends? Today, we're going to be bringing back the old trusty Reddit app, or subreddit app, however you want to put it. But we're going to be bringing it back to showcase some testing, and we're going to be using the testing framework Jest. All right, it's one of my favorite testing frameworks. We're going to start with some basics, but we're going to initialize the project for the entire series of videos that I'm going to do. So at first, this first video is going to cover unit testing and setting up your project. So let's get right into it. All right, so we're going to start off with our Reddit repo, and the link to that is actually in the description below. I just renamed it to Just Testing, and I npm installed. That's the only thing we've done so far. But the reason we're using this repo is just because it's already somewhat built out as, you know, a full stack app here. And so we want to be able to kind of showcase the breadth of Jest as a testing framework. And so we wanted some sort of content to begin with so that we could actually go through and show you the different types of testing that we're going to be doing, the different parts. So let's open up our package.json. And the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to install all of the packages we're going to need for all the parts of the series. And so this will be a little bit more intense than I feel like it needs to be just for this video, but it's going to set you up for success later on. So we're going to open up a terminal, and we are going to actually install all of the packages that we need up front, which is going to be Jest. So we're going to npm i-save dev, and we're going to have Jest. We're going to have @type/Jest since we're using TypeScript, and then we're going to have ts-jest. So Babel also has a TypeScript preset that you can use to use TypeScript with Jest, but personally I found ts-jest is a little bit easier to work with. But if you want the latest version of Jest, I think you actually have to use the Babel preset. So maybe we'll do another future video where we're actually using that. But we're also going to be using something called testing library. So it's @testing library. And we're just going to install a couple of the packages involved with this. So we want the DOM package. We want the Jest DOM package. We want the React package since we're using React. And then, whoops, testing library, we want the user event package. So that'll allow us to actually do user events. And then I believe that should be, there's one more that we're going to do, and it's identity object proxy. And what that's going to play into, or where that's going to come into play, is when we're actually importing styles in some of these pages. So actually, when you have this like home.module.css, when we import that into a page, this is going to be used to actually allow us to do that for mockups and whatnot. And so we're going to go ahead and click enter. Hopefully I typed all of that right. No idea if this is going to install. Oh, and it does not. Let's see. It does not like React 17.0.2. So it's the testing library one that it's not a fan of. And so we actually need to update the React version as well. So what we could do first is we could npm i-save react @latest. All right, so now we have React 18.2, and then actually let's also npm i-save react DOM @latest. All right, so now we have 18.2. Now let's go back and rerun that npm i. So if you want, you can update all of these. We're going to leave them just as is for now, but obviously Next is behind as well if you wanted to update Next to the latest one. We're not going to worry about it right now. All right, so we have everything installed now. Let's just double check all this. Yep, so we have all of our testing library. We have @type/Jest, we have ts-jest, and then we have just Jest, right? And so we're going to add a test script in here, and all it's going to be is just Jest, right? So Jest is going to know what to do. It's going to reference the files that we're about to create, and then it's going to go look for test files to run the test suite. So the files that we're actually going to have to create over here, since we're using TypeScript, we're going to want a tsconfig.jest.json. All right, and so in this tsconfig file, it's obviously just an object, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to extend the tsconfig.json file, and then the compiler options. So that this is actually what it's going to use when it runs your test suite. And so for compiler options for JSX, we're actually going to use React.jsx in here. So you're going to want those options, and so that tsconfig is now set. And The next file that we're going to have to create is actually a Jest file. So it's going to be jest.setup.ts. All right, so now we have our Jest setup file. And in here, all we're going to be doing is we're going to actually be importing our @testing library. So this will come more into like actual component testing, but it's going to be @testing library, and then we're just importing Jest DOM. And so that's all we really need for Jest setup. And next, we're going to have to create another file, which is our Jest config file. So we're going to do jest.config.js. And this file is a little bit larger. It's an actual module.exports file. Whoa, not sure why it did that. Module.exports equals, and then it's just the object. And so we're going to have a preset. The preset's going to be tsjest. It's going to be a setup files after env. It's going to be an array. And what this is going to be, it's going to be root_dir /jest.setup.ts. And then we're going to have test path ignore patterns. So this is going to ignore important folders that we don't want to actually be looking for. So we can use root_dir, and then it's just the next folder. And then we're going to have root_dir and node modules. All right, and then keep that / in there. Then we're going to have our test environment, and that's going to be JS DOM. Then we're going to have a module name mapper. And so this is actually where that identity object proxy comes into play. So under module name mapper, we're going to have a 2 backslashes and then a dot, and then for SCSS files, SAS files, or CSS, where it actually ends with that, we are going to map that using identity object proxy. All right, and then for globals, we're going to say tsjest, and inside tsjest we have our tsconfig, and we're just going to map it to the tsconfig.jest.json there. All right, awesome. We don't need that guy. All right, so we have our globals. Basically have our preset here is tsjest, and then we have our tsconfig mapping to that tsjest. And that should be all the files that we actually need. Now, if we run npm run test, it will, or it should at least, actually look for any test files. So if we just do npm test, all right. Oh, looks like we actually need a npm i-save dev, and we're going to need just environment JS DOM. All right, now let's npm test. All right. So we actually have no test found exiting with code 1. All right, so that's true. We have no tests. All right, so we just forgot one node module in there that it freaked out about. It looks like as of Jest 28, Jest environment JS DOM is no longer shipped in the package. So we just had to npm I that. Not a big deal. If we go back to our package.json, you can see that it just added this in there. So that is now the Jest environment JS DOM. Hopefully this 29.0.1 is fine with the 28. We'll see if we get any problems down the road. But if we do, we'll come back. We'll just change that value. For now, I'm not going to worry about it. So now that we have everything set up and we have the ability, it looks like it is actually running it. So no files found, which is fine. We are going to create our first test file. And our first test file is really just going to be for the most basic form of testing, unit testing. So we have this utils folder. Perfect for unit testing. We are just going to do our index.test.ts. It's typically how I like to do my test files. And we are going to import a few things from index. So first thing we're going to import is nil, right? So we're going to import that is nil function. If you look into this, you can see that it's all just, you know, basic functional tests or basic functions that will do some, you know, type checking, things like that. So the most advanced function we have in here is a serialized query. So let's, for an example, we're going to test probably is nil, and we're going to test serialized query. So let's go ahead, go back to our index. So we're going to pull in is nil, and we're going to pull in serialized query. All right, awesome. So the very first thing we're going to do is, typically from a testing standpoint, what I like to do, and I like how they actually show this as a different color because it's a test file. But I like to kind of add my test files in the folders that are relevant to the file we're testing, right? So for our components in this navbar, we would have our navbar test right in that folder. Now, some people do it all in a single test folder. I like to do it in the same folder, but again, that's personal preference. You might see that different on different projects, or whoever actually sets up the project might do it differently. So be willing to kind of accept that and be willing to work in any environment in that case. But you know, if when you're actually creating your project, create it however you want. It doesn't matter. But for this case, what we're going to actually do is we're going to call the test function. All right. And you can see that we have the typings in here, which is awesome. But this test function is going to take in a group name. So this is going to be a group of tests. So let's do, you know, let's call this just checking is nil. And then it takes a function. All right, and inside this function, we actually have to run all of our tests, right? So we can do the function expect, and then inside the expect, what we do is we actually put the expected values. So we say is nil, null, right? And then we say to equal true. All right, so you can run this to equal function. All right, it's when it checks that two objects have the same value. It rechecks the quality of all fields. They also have a to be, all right, function. It's a strict equality, so you know, use different things for different values. Now for the value true, you could just say true. Probably the better call. Equal would also be fine, but again, it's kind of your call as far as that goes. So let's just run to be true at first, and let's just make sure this works. So we're going to run the same npm test function. All right, so it runs utils index_test.ts, and you have a one pass. So checking is nil is called, took 3 milliseconds, test suites, one pass, one total. All right, and so all test suites have been run, and we have successfully done this. So let's go ahead and we can actually create some more of these, right? So checking is nil, we say expect is nil, you know, test to be false, right? And then you can say expect is nil, whoops, is nil, undefined, to be true. All right. And typically I like to kind of have, you know, groupings that in there that make sense. You know, expect is nil. So actually, let's go ahead and just kind of showcase one thing, right? So what is the actual importance of these unit tests, right? So you might just think like, wow, well, this is so simple. All right. Is nil, all it does is check two things. Obviously, anything that's null or undefined is going to come back true. Anything else is going to be false, right? So, you know, just to clarify this, expect is nil, you know, 1 dot to be false, right? So if we do run npm test again, it's going to take a little bit. All right, awesome. So our tests have passed. Checking is nil. So it actually will check all of these. So for instance, just to kind of show you what happens if we run this npm test. All right, so we have our test suite failed. If we come up here, it'll actually show exactly, so let's kind of increase this real quick. It'll show exactly what the issue is. So expect received to be expected, object it is equality. So we expected true, we received false, and then it actually shows the exact line right here. So this is how you would know that it was false, or that which test was giving you the error. You could also break up, the tests into different groups, but that's kind of up to you. I like to include all of the tests for a particular function in the same test group, so we know that checking is nil is gone bad, right? So let's go ahead and fix that. Now you might be asking, why would you ever need a functional test for a function like this, right? Or a unit test for a function like this? Now, the real answer to this is that when you're actually using, or when you're on a team of people, right, and you're actually coding this thing as a team, a lot of people might try and like use the same function for different purposes, and they'll go in and you might have code somewhere that is calling isNil on something that's an empty string, for instance, right? And you're expecting this to be false because it is not nil, right? It is not null or undefined. Now this might be a bad example because hopefully somebody isn't going to come in and change the isNil function, but more times than ever, I will see somebody go in and they'll be like, oh look, this is almost what we need, but let's just add this in there now, right? Now all of a sudden, right, imagine this wasn't in here, this is empty wasn't in here, so they didn't have that function to call. They just wanted to repurpose this isNil function. Now all of a sudden, this might break your code. This is going to come in and it's going to break whatever that check was on that empty string, right? So now, when you were doing, right, if you had this functional test and you said expect isNil empty string, right, to be false, all right, when we run this right now, we pass. But if somebody comes in here, they mess with your code, and they put this in there, and then they use that isNil function for their purposes, when they run that testing suite, hopefully it runs a little bit faster on their computer, it's going to fail, right? That test is going to fail, and now they're going to know that they messed up, and it's not going to deploy, and you're not going to have, issues that cause all sorts of pandemonium, right? So again, this is why we do unit tests. This is why we put these tests in here. It's for people being stupid and repurposing functions. All right, so we have our test checking as nil. So now let's just do one more test. Let's do serializing a query object. Whoops. There we go. All right, so we can expect serialize query null, right? Dot to be empty string. Then we can kind of do the same thing with just an empty object, right? And then we can kind of get a little bit more advanced. So let's just say expect, let's say serialize query. Let's do just something with one property, right? So serialize query, limit 10. Oops, can't do that. And then this will be, two. Let's just run the 2 equals function just so you can see that it actually works as well. Limit equals 10, right? And then we'll say expect serialize query, and let's do multiple functions. So let's say count, or let's do multiple properties, count, limit, and let's do something like an after, and then we'll say, I think the Reddit one is, it has something like T3, P0, 2 CS, something like that. All right, so we'll do, multiple properties, and this will be 2 equal, and we're gonna have our, let's see, it should do everything in this order, right? So let's say count equals 0. I don't know if it's gonna do alphabetical or if it's gonna do in the order of the object, now that I'm thinking about this. So this will be a fun little test. Oops, not comma, it's an and. Limit equals 10, and after equals T3. Made this a little difficult on myself, didn't I? 2 CS. All right, so let's go ahead and run that. This one might actually error, so this will be actually cool. You can learn something through tests. So go ahead and run that. And we got pass, right? So test suites, one pass. So this is our test suite here. And then we have our tests. We have checking is null, and we have serializing a query object. So it does serialize it in actual order that the object was created. So that's interesting. But again, there we go. We have our equals there, and everything looks good. So that's unit testing in a nutshell. Feel free to add as many of these tests as you want. And we're going to go over some component testing in the next part. All right, so I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope you learned a little something, and I hope they were able to successfully add Jest into your own projects and use the framework, because it is extremely helpful, and it's probably one of the better testing frameworks that I've used ever. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below. Otherwise, we will be creating another part to this series. So be on the lookout. Make sure you hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Otherwise, we'll see you soon.